Anybody doesn't want to be recorded, let us know. Write down your question, pass it to us. I should also say too, you probably won't be able to hear the questions in the audience, so I'll be repeating your question at the end for him to be able to hear. So if you would kind of keep them short and manageable so that I don't booger it up too bad. So my name is Mike Fedoroff. Claiborne C here. Come on up, Claiborne. Get in the photo. We're talking a little bit about a collaborative project we did with the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and with us today we have Ryan Spring as a special guest. Speaking a little bit about the project, Ryan has filled a lot of roles at Choctaw Nation over the years. He's worked for the Historic Preservation Department, the GIS Department. He coaches stickball. I mean, the guy does a lot for his community, and I've had the pleasure of working with Ryan for, man, a number of years now, huh, Ryan? I forget how many years. And we've become good friends in addition to collaborators. So I really appreciate him taking the time to join us today. I'm going to let Ryan introduce himself when he starts talking on his slides, but we have a first slide. Ryan, if you could go ahead and jump to that first slide, we'll get started. Can everybody kind of see that? It looks a little grainy. So this is sort of the intro slide into sort of a concept of collaboration that the Choctaw Nation and I have been working on for some years. And if you see, there's a ladder of participation here. And on the very bottom of the ladder, you have sort of, to educate or cure stakeholders. The idea is to involve participation and gain public support so you can educate them. That's not really collaborative, right? That's sort of one direction. And a lot of times we in the academy and in industry and government kind of take this approach, whether it's through compliance for Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act or NAGPRA, or heck, just in everyday dealings with people that we work with, trying to let them know about the topic we're working on or some new research that we found out. When you get into kind of going up the ladder, you start seeing more and more meaningful participation. And at some point, what you find is power can actually be shared in the decision-making between the groups. And that's really sort of the true type of collaboration that we're trying to work on with Indigenous groups, not just in our research, but in our everyday lives. So this project that we're about to talk about is something that was conceptualized by the Choctaw Nation. It was a need that they had. And they reached out to Claiborne and I, and Claiborne, for the most part, had the skill set to do it, right? And so we got everybody together and just sort of conceptualized what it would look like. And so I'll let them talk a little bit about the project and kind of walk you through the results and what that means to the tribe in terms of decision-making, power, who holds the data, that sort of thing. So with that, Ryan, I'd like to turn it over to you. And when you get ready, you can turn it over to Clay.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So one of the things I want to note real quick on this topic is, the reason the Choctaw Nation reached out to Mike in Claiborne is because of the relationship that we have with Mike. This is something that, it can definitely be a work relationship, but it's more than that. We're friends as well. And that's because we've invested in each other as human beings. Indigenous people come from that background of, I should say for Choctaws, you're either kin or you're not. And that's the roots that we come from. And so when we're creating relationships, on a government to government level, one of the earliest relationships we had with the United States is adopting those United States officials in as family. And so that's the relationship that we have, with Mike, is that over the years, we've worked together to help each other. And it's created this strong, lasting relationship that we've been able to use to help create agreements to help the Choctaw Nation and the Army Corps of Engineers. So I just, before I do anything, I just want to thank Mike for all of the hard work and dedication that he's done for helping not just, you know, U.S. citizens, but Choctaw tribal members as well. So thank you, Mike.
You still owe me a blowgun, but
hey, at least I got your bag back to you. That took like what, 3 years? So on here on the screen, I have a map of Choctaw communities and lands from the 18th century to today. It's actually an interesting story of how this map came about. I'm not going to go too much into it, but this is the English version of the map. The map was actually originally made in French, and it's in a French exhibit over in France right now. And that's because of a 3-year relationship that we have with this particular institution. And all that's kind of come together to create this Choctaw French exhibit, and it's been amazing. But I wanted to share this map with you because Choctaw people have a rich history in the Southeastern United States since time immemorial. Our ancestors have lived on the land as stewards and become part of the land when they passed. Over thousands of years, Choctaw people left footprints that show the relationship we have with our homelands. Choctaw identity and the relationship we have with the land are tied deeply together. So you can see on this map just kind of the sphere of where Choctaw people have moved around through time. And throughout that movement, they've left things on the landscape, things that uniquely identify us as, you know, having been lived there before. For 15,000 years, Choctaw people have passed down oral histories of the land. One is the formation of the Black Belt Prairie along the Tombigbee River that describes huge animals that lived in the region when Choctaws first lived around Naniwa. This is an excerpt from Cushman that he got from a Choctaw individual, but it says, "These mighty animals broke off the low limbs of the trees in eating the leaves and also gnawed the bark off the trees, which in course of time caused them to wither and die. They roamed in different bands that engaged in desperate battles whenever they met, and thus caused them to rapidly decrease in numbers. And that in the course of years, all had perished but 2 large males, who separate and alone wander around for several years, each confining himself to the solitude of the forest many miles from the other. Finally, in their wanderings, they met, and once engaged in terrible conflict in which one was killed. The survivor, now monarch of the forest, strolled about for a few years, wrapped in the solitude of his own reflections and independence, then died, and with him the race became extinct." So Choctaw people have been in the Southeast as far back as having oral stories about mastodons. I mean, that oral story, you know, we've had for years, and it's always been pushed off until we started seeing archaeological evidence and, you know, of mastodon kill sites in the Southeast. And so archaeology has kind of helped date our oral stories. So we as Choctaws know our history, but part of the struggle that we have today is validating that history on a Western basis. So that's partly what we're doing with Choctaw place names. So in 2011, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma Historic Preservation Department began building its cultural GIS program. After the creation of our area of historic interest in the Choctaw Register of Historic Places came the Choctaw Place Names database. This database stores information on traditional and contemporary Choctaw names of places on the land. So if you look at this map, can you see where Choctaws have lived? I mean, you look at the Choctaw homelands and, you know, in East Central Mississippi, and I mean, it's dark with all that blue. You can see that Choctaw people have been there and they've left the names on the land. And then you go to Oklahoma and you can see there's a lot there, but there's not as much. And that really shows, you know, our history on the land in the Southeast is much longer and deeper than it is now here in Oklahoma. The Choctaw Place Names Database is used daily to help protect Choctaw sovereignty. It's used to aid in the protection of our archaeological sites through the National Historic Preservation Act. It's used as criteria of evidence. We can use Choctaw place names to aid in the justification for archaeological survey within the areas of potential effect. And we've done this several times with the Army Corps of Engineers. It's also extensively used under Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act as linguistic evidence. Each year we take Choctaw youth to our homelands, and we use GIS and we use these place names so that they can see these places, but also interact with them as we travel deeper into our homelands. So our relationship with the land is not something in the past. It's something that we continue still in the present, and then we push towards in our future as well. So part of the examples I'm going to be showing you look at not just, again, place names in the past, but how they're contemporarily still being used by Choctaw people and how they will continue to be used by Choctaw people. Even though Choctaws may not still physically live there, or the numbers are greatly decreased, we still have ties to that land. The Choctaw relationship with land is deeply rooted in our culture, language, history, and spirituality, and sovereignty. The following are a few examples of Choctaw landscapes that people still have ties to today. In this picture is Naniwa Mound. Naniwa is the most sacred of Choctaw places. It's part of our most prominent creation stories and has served as the spiritual center of the Choctaw world. It's actually quite close to you all. It's in Winston County, Mississippi. Nearby it is Naniwa Chaluk. Naniwa Chaluk is our place of creation. Our stories tell us the clay shown in this picture was used by the Creator to shape our people. From under this hill, an opening was created for us to come out onto this world. So these two places are tied to each other. But more importantly, you know, they're tied to our identity as Choctaw people. And it doesn't matter where Choctaw people go, these places will always be tied to us. And an example of that is Naniwa, Oklahoma. So Naniwa, Oklahoma is named after our mother mound and was the first capital of the Choctaw Nation after our removal from our homelands in 1834. Oral stories say that earth from Naniwa, Mississippi was taken by wagon and brought here to Oklahoma to create a small mound, thus taking a part of our homeland with us. In 1838, our first council house was built, shown on the top left. And then on the bottom left is a small clay eating bowl that was brought on the removal. Bowls like this represent family heirlooms, and it was a way that Choctaw women brought their ancestors, community, and their homes with them on the removal. So we have a place that is so sacred to us that we took it with us physically, emotionally, spiritually, and it still serves, it still has an impact on our people today. And that's why place, a sense of place and place names are so important to Indigenous people. And that's why it's important to recognize it when you're doing, you know, whatever you go on to do. Anytime you do work with Indigenous people, remember that sense of place is tied into their very soul. Hacha Balbaha. Hacha Balbaha is the Choctaw word for the Mississippi River. It translates to a river of foreign language speakers. Choctaw people have traveled and traded with people that spoke many different languages on this river for thousands of years. Each year we take young future Choctaw leaders to visit this great place. So we do an Indigenous immersion camp, and Mike has helped us with that for several years. And part of doing that is when we drive from Oklahoma to our homelands, we cross the Mississippi at Vicksburg, and we make sure to get out and we make sure to kind of sit and share these stories with them and share the information, because Choctaw is a descriptive language. It's a language that it explains in the Choctaw concepts. It explains the importance of that place. Just like Balbaha Tamaha. Balbaha Tamaha is the name for New Orleans. It was established by the French. Choctaw people traded here and recognized a large multicultural community of many different languages. For many years, our department worked with the National Park Service to take Choctaw youth to participate as living historians at the Battle of New Orleans reenactment event. Hachahatak. Today known as the Tombigbee River, Choctaw people lived on this river before European contact. The river took on other names after Choctaw people moved off the river into the interior of East Central Mississippi, to escape disease spread by waterways. It's possible that the name Chutta comes from Hacha Hatak. So the CH in Hacha and the Ta and Hatak could be where Chutta comes from. It's very common in the Southeast that riverways are named off the people that lived on them. So what you see is the Hacha-Hatak used to also be called the Tahomey River, because the Tahomey people, which later joined Choctaws, lived on that river too. It's interesting that the Tombigbee, which comes from Itambi Ikbi Bok, is a Choctaw word, but it's not the word for the river. That was basically it was a miscommunication between Choctaw and French explorers. The French explorers asked, what was the name of this river? And either the Choctaw was broken or the Choctaw understanding of French was broken. And the Choctaws were explaining that, oh, that creek over there, that's where the box maker lives. That's where the coffin maker lives. This one's a powerful one. It's one of my favorites, but Santibok. Santibok Creek is a Western linguistical corruption of Santibok, meaning Snake Creek. It's possible that Choctaw people named this creek after the fossil remains of Basilosaurus found on it. The Basilosaurus may have sacred ties to Choctaw stories about death still today. So the Basilosaurus that's in the University of Alabama Museum comes from that creek or one of the ones nearby it. And I just think it's really cool because, you know, we know that they're kind of these ancient whales now, but if you look at the skeletal remains, I could see why our ancestors thought they were snakes. It's pretty interesting. This one's cool. Pachiayata means pigeon roost. Sorry, means pigeon roost there. This Choctaw place name refers to the passenger pigeons that roosted there within the large river cane breaks. It's possible that Choctaws who founded Pigeon Roost, Oklahoma, came from a place in the homelands with a name similar to this. Chishafoca. Chishafoca is the name of the Choctaw village that once stood in Jackson, Mississippi. It means among the post oaks. The National Park Service worked with us to help reclaim Choctaw place names in this area. So the National Park Service a few years ago reached out, actually the Natchez Trace Parkway, and they said, we want to name this trail after, I think one of the chiefs that had a house nearby. And we thought about it for a little bit, and you know, we were honored by that request, but we said, what about Chishafoca, which is the original name of that area? And then, of course, they loved the idea, so we went with it. But, you know, we have a good relationship with the Natchez Trace Parkway, again, because we've created and fostered that relationship over several years. And after creating those relationships, then we move on to creating agreements that help. Even if one of us move on or pass away, those agreements are still there, and they still help communities. Okay, I'm going to speed through some of these. Okatachito refers to the big lake, and it means basically it's the word for the Gulf of Mexico. In the Choctaw language, the cardinal direction for south is Okamahli, or water winds, based on the winds that come up from the Gulf. There's Choctaw stories that talk about how a crow flew across the Gulf of Mexico and brought us corn. And the corn that's talked about in these stories is still corn that Choctaw people grow today that brought over on Trail of Tears. Poa Atikfa. It means place where wild animals have shed their hair. During the 18th and 19th century, European diseases killed 90% of indigenous populations of North America. The population crash in the Southeast expanded the natural range of the American bison across indigenous managed prairies, all the way into Florida. Choctaw women were known to go to places like Poa Atikfa to collect bison hair that had been shed on the trees in these areas. A group of talented Choctaw artisans created a woven buffalo hair and dog bane skirt for the exhibits here at our Choctaw Cultural Center. This may be the first time a bison hair skirt has been made by Choctaw people in over 200 years. This particular skirt took 150 to 200 hours to make, split between both Sandra and Jennifer. So it took quite a while to do it. But it shows how these living traditions that we have in the past are still a part of our communities today. And we may be doing them in different places, but the ties to the land are still there. Apotakahatcha means border river. It's the later name for the Tuscaloosa or Black Warrior River. In the 1700s, the Black Warrior River was known as the boundary between Choctaw Creeks and was named after Chief Tuscaloosa, who was there much earlier during DeSoto's time. Deeper in the past, the name of the river was known as Ponchifalaya, or the Longhairs, another name for Choctaw people who lived along the river. Today, Choctaw people still travel to this place to visit one of our ancestors' greatest cities, Moundville. So it's a beautiful thing to go to Moundville and then go up to the side of the hill and just overlook the Black Warrior River coming in and going out. And I just imagine all of the people that were going up and down that river every day, all the trade that was going on, all the different languages that were being spoken, all the jokes. Yeah. Alba Amo. Alba Amo is the Choctaw word for Alabama River, and it means to gather vegetation. Today, through agreements with the Army Corps of Engineers, Choctaw people still visit this river, or actually visit rivers like this in Alabama to gather traditional plants. So over several years, we created this relationship with Mike, and Mike helped us create this agreement where we could come once a year to gather different items that we need to make traditional wares. And this is when Mike was still working for the Mobile District Army Corps of Engineers. And when he left to join the TNT CX, that agreement still stands. So it doesn't matter what our relationship is with the Mobile District, that agreement is still there and it's still in place. Halun Lawansha, yeah, Halun Lawansha. Before the modern day town of Philadelphia, Mississippi, a Choctaw village stood in the area. Named Bullfrogs are there. Choctaw people were some of the first Southerners to enjoy frog legs. Nearby is the Choctaw Pearl River community, where the headquarters of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians is located, and the home of the World Series of Stickball. This is the youth team that won 2 years ago. Yeah, 2019.
You should mention that Neshoba is a Choctaw word as well, Neshoba County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it means wolf. And that's talking about the red wolf, which is no longer there, but it's been interbred with coyotes. That's why you hear coyotes howl sometimes. That's what I've been told anyway. Lastly, I have Tushkahoma. Tushkahoma means red warrior. and it's the name of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma capital. It was built in 1884. The capital was named after Chief Jackson Fraser McCurtain, who was given the nickname Tushkahoma during the American Civil War. In Choctaw, Homa is commonly used to mean the color red. However, when it's used in a name like Tushkahoma, it means a warrior who doesn't retreat. Our capital, Tushkahoma, lies just a few miles north of Naniwa, Oklahoma. And it's one of the largest representations of Choctaw sovereignty in all of southeastern Oklahoma. And it tells the world, we are the Choctaw Nation. We will never back down, we will never retreat, and we will always fight for our God-given sovereignty. So these were examples of different Choctaw place names. But as you saw through some of them, the ability to go back and to interact with these place names stems from the relationships that we have with the different federal agencies that manage these lands. We made how do I explain it? As part of our creation, Choctaw people made an agreement with God. The Creator wanted us to be stewards of the lands that He created, and He created us to be stewards of the Southeast. While the land itself may have been taken from us, that agreement that we have with God is still there and it's still active. So it's our responsibility as the stewards of those lands to work with the different federal agencies and state agencies and towns and counties to do our best to continue that sacred agreement. This picture here is a picture from a few years ago, and it has Choctaw Nation staff, Choctaw Nation leadership, and also leadership with the Army Corps of Engineers and the I think there was another agency that was involved. But one of the most sacred duties that we have is, reburying our ancestors that have been put in museums and the things that they were buried with. So being able to work with Mike and creating these relationships lets us continue our sacred duty. Anyway, thank you, Mike. I will pass it on back to you guys.
Appreciate it, Ryan. Thank you. I think Claiborne may have a slide in there. There we go. Oh, let me move your photo. So, I hope you guys get a sense, in listening to Ryan talk. Every time Ryan gives a presentation, I learn something new, and I grew up near a lot of these places. So you can imagine how important it is, if you aren't nearby, to be able to have access to this type of information. Archaeologists and anthropologists and linguists have generated a lot of this data. And the tribe and Ryan have been able to sort of reawaken some of those interpretations more in line with the Choctaw culture through their actions. And as part of that project, they enlisted Claiborne to work with their database and sort of make it more user-friendly and do some stuff. And I'm going to turn that to Claiborne to talk about. So, and he's going to sing too. I am, but Mike's going to play the flute. So I'm just going to read, like, it best emphasizes the points that I'm trying to make. So it keeps me from rambling. For those of you I haven't met, or those of you I haven't seen since the start of the pandemic and might have forgotten me, my name is Beau. I'm with your PhD student in the department studying archaeology in the Southeast. I got my master's degree in geosciences with concentration in geospatial analysis in 2018. So my specialty in archaeology revolves around many techniques of geospatial analysis, emphasis on systems and geophysics. So because of my background, I was approached by Mike with an opportunity to work on this project, which I would sincerely like to thank the Choctaw Nation for and the Tribal Nations Technical Center for. So when I was first notified about the opportunity to work on this project, I was immediately interested for multiple reasons. First is that I saw it as a great opportunity to work in service of the Choctaw Nation on a project they were interested in, and in the process form what I hope to be a lifelong relationship. Secondly, I simply saw it as an extremely interesting and unique experience. At the time as a GIS analyst, I worked in city planning, public health, chemistry, engineering, hydrology, wildlife biology, and of course archaeology. However, this was unique in that it incorporated linguistics and was intended to facilitate community engagement through GIS, both qualities. So the overall goal of this project was to add new Choctaw places to the existing place name database, including those which were modern corruptions of traditional Choctaw place names. Additionally, my initial meetings with Ryan and Mike, Ryan alluded to the fact that this would be an example to other Indigenous communities who form similar databases. And as such, he encouraged me to be creative and open about things that I thought may enhance the data set, like features to make it more dynamic, interactive, and component accessibility. Because it was a new avenue. Because it was a new avenue for GIS for me, I was rather curious about how it would turn. My method for recording and inputting place names is pretty standard. Overall, I read about 2,500 pages of place names in encyclopedias and academic research covering Alabama, Mississippi. I noted all the attributes that I could about each and placed them in an Excel document. I ended up recording attributes for about 551 new place names across the three states, which included 322 new water bodies and 229 on-land places such as settlements and other landmarks. This number includes both traditional names and names that are corruptions of the Choctaw People. After the places were recorded, they were located based on descriptions in the references, and a new feature class was created in the GIS for each. In the process of recording these places, I had specific attributes about each that I thought would enhance the data set and allow for additional functionality. Particularly, I added a language of origin for each corruption, such as French, English, or Spanish, as well as a date range for each corrupted use of the place that I found in the literature where possible. And this also included locating them on some 18th and 19th century maps so that I could kind of judge. And so, I think it's the next slide. It's the top slide. No, you got it up there. Yeah. We're moving you around, Ryan, on the screen. That's the easiest way to move Ryan's spring from one spot to another. Yeah, so time sliders in GIS are used to basically as a filter almost, so you can, based on time, some places will either drop out of the data set if they're not mentioned, or the names themselves will change. So you can see here, so Cabajanose is a Spanish word for just this general area. I can't remember exactly which parish in Louisiana it's referring to today, but that name is a corruption of the traditional Choctaw name. You see, is that how you spell that or say that, Ryan?
It looks like Hakoba Anosi.
Okay. So basically what this slide is showing is that in 1762, it was referred to as its traditional Choctaw name, but by 1766, it was already corrupted into Spanish. And that name has changed again about 3 or 4 times to the modern day. All variations of spelling. So as I said, the time slider is basically a tool which filters data based on the range set by the user. and it also modifies labels to it so that you can see the transformation of the place name. Does that mean sleeping hammer, Ryan? Anosi is sleeping.
Yeah, Anosi means sleeping, or it can mean roosting. Hakoba.
Is a hammer. Anyway, this sort of feature is important as it provides time depth, but it also can provide potential clues for those place names, which the Choctaw origin were stated, or future cases when similar place names are noted elsewhere in the Choctaw. Because what I found is that for some names, they can refer to either, some creeks are called one thing, another creek in another place would be called the same thing. Another feature I added was hyperlinking. Ryan, can you change the slide for me, please? And so basically, within the GIS data set, I included links for the various places to the images of the textual references where they're found. So this is the same example, the same place. So these links can be simply activated by just clicking on the point or the river itself. So as I've said, this project was very unique, which made it challenging, but a fulfilling one to be a part of. I learned a lot of new techniques regarding data acquisition and creation, and many functions that GIS can have. But while learning some new techniques is great, the more impactful lessons were about the benefits of conversation, collaboration, and in-person engagements with Indigenous communities. GIS is a powerful tool. In my experience, I've seen it work for both communities. I've seen it work for communities and against them. The biggest takeaway from this project for me has been the change, in my typically the use of GIS, regardless of the application, is one that we often humanize. We tend to think little of the broader impacts, both good or bad, that it can have. And GIS is and can be much more than feature classes and pixel lines. It can use the benefit of communities and facilitate community learning and other engagements. And as I've said, this project was an opportunity to work in service to the Choctaw and promote their interests. From my perspective, it was also an example of successful partnerships can promote for both parties when done carefully and respectfully. And so, just again, I would like to thank the Choctaw Nation for the opportunities provided here, and the Tribal Nations Technical Center for initiating and facilitating. Well, Ryan, yeah, I mean, Claiborne brings up a good point. Like we can use our skills as anthropologists and archaeologists not to just do stuff for us, right? Research that we're interested in, benefits our degrees or our careers. We can actually find sort of overlap or synergy with descendant communities, Indigenous groups, local community members. I know a lot of you are in biomedical, and there's huge things that help those communities as well. So yeah, it's kind of a great example of Claiborne kind of jumping in with GIS skills and building a relationship with Ryan and the tribe and coming up with something that neither party could have done on their own, quite frankly, as well as they did together. And so I think that's another good takeaway. So Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about future plans for some of this and also kind of what this type of collaborative project means to the community?
Yeah, sure. So I want to definitely take a second to thank Claiborne and all the hard work he's done. I mean, he was amazing to work with, as a GIS professional. I mean, he just grand slammed it. Like, he did an amazing job. David and I in our office, we're not GIS professionals by trade. It's something that we've picked up and we've adapted and we use as a tool. So it was really great to work with Claiborne and just see different perspectives and to take that kind of constructive criticism and add it. And I'm really thankful. In the future, I've already talked it over with my leadership, and we're open to working with him some more this next year. But at the same time, we got him to get him to finish. He's got to get that PhD. So it's something that education is something we value very much. So we want to make sure that we can support him, but we don't take away, from his hard work too. With this particular database, I was talking with David. David Batten is the GIS specialist. He's actually over the cultural GIS program. I work with David now with it, but we're taking the changes that Claiborne's done, and we're going to incorporate those changes into our GIS, into the database, and kind of bring those out. So I'm really excited about the slider. I never thought about it. We made sure that we put dates in there. But I never thought about using the slider tool to be able to, and that way as our, because I can see the dates in there and I know what's going on, but our 106 reviewers, that's an easy tool for them to use when they're working on projects. The hyperlinking, we actually hyperlink to a document management system called Laserfish. So what we're going to do is just roll his hyperlinks that he's made into a data set. And then we'll do some Python scripting to change the links, and they'll be good to go. So for the project itself, it will continue, and it will, I think it doesn't end. I mean, there's always place names, and as long as there's Choctaw people, there'll be Choctaw place names. So it's something that we'll keep working on and keep adding to. But with the workload that we have, I'm just so thankful for Claiborne and Mike and how easy they were to work with. We didn't have to do much. It was like, here's what we want to do. Here's how we do things. I want to see what you can do. And it was amazing. So I'm really excited to work more. Our leadership has kind of expanded our capabilities to work more. And I'm not going to make Megan talk. She's on the call. But part of what we do is, we're trying to train not just Choctaw academics, but, American academics on how to interact with Indigenous communities, but also digging into those primary sources for stuff. A lot of times we use way too many secondary sources, and that's where these good juicy place names are at, is in these primary sources. So it's digging.
That was an archaeology joke Ryan just tried to make. Mm-hmm. We got it, Ryan. Yeah. What you did there, you're not fooling it.
Well, I'm sorry. Get to remote sensing. That's better.
So I'd like to, we have a little time left. I'd like to open the floor, Ryan, if it's okay with you, with any questions the audience may have for you or myself or Claiborne. Yeah, so we'll do that now. You okay with that?
Sounds great.
Okay, Ome. Who's up first? They're all formulating their question, Ryan. I can see them thinking. Oh, Dr. Blair.
Yeah, I think it's for Ryan. So Ryan, how is this GIS is software? How do you make it accessible and available to tribal members who aren't GIS specialists or proficient in the software or don't have access to it? How do you share it with the tribe, the rest of the tribe?
All right, did you catch that, Ryan? I can repeat it if you need.
I caught none of it.
Okay. So basically, Dr. Blair was asking, GIS isn't necessarily something the everyday community members and elders work with a lot. How do you take the information in this GIS database and make it accessible to your community?
That's a really great question. So we use GIS as a tool. So we use it to store the information and kind of package it. But the way that we export it to our community is through doing presentations like this. It's through doing interaction. It's through working one-on-one with our youth. It's kind of changing the information. So GIS is not a new thing. Geographic information systems are just kind of, it's a new way of processing geospatial knowledge. So in the past, Native people had an amazing geospatial knowledge that they shared with their community members, with their family members. And so we use GIS to kind of package all that together, but then we unpackage it and we share it back through that kind of traditional geospatial kind of concept. And it's not like it's this big, big, well thought out plan. It's just kind of how we do it because, because, the tools out there, ArcGIS Online is a great powerhouse for serving those things out. We haven't had the chance to use AGOL a lot just because of our workload. However, it is on my list. I really want to do more story maps. I think story maps are a really great way to get it into the hands of our youth and get them really working, and seeing this, this information. One of the things we have done is exported it as GeoPDFs, and that's what we use with our youth on their cell phones when we travel to the homelands. So that way, their GPS information is tracked on the GeoPDF as they're, flying through the homelands. So it's
that was exactly, you stole what I was going to say, Ryan. That's such a cool use of modern technology and this GIS information into the traditional, the modern traditional approach to, revisiting the homeland, visiting these areas, immersing themselves in their ancestral culture while still being on their. They show me some really cool games and apps whenever they come in town. I've learned more apps from the Choctaw kids than I ever knew before. That's a great example, Ryan.
I think one thing I want to start experimenting with a little bit more is iNaturalist. So especially when it comes to river cane restoration. I'm looking forward to a webinar that's supposed to be upcoming on that in the next few months. And I want to see if that may be an option of working with community members to gather plant information to put into our plants geodatabase.
Great. Allie.
I'm curious, how many total place names do you have in the database now?
What's your total number of place names, Ryan? Go.
Let's see as I pull up ArcGIS Pro right now.
Anybody want to guess? Let's take a guess. Let's make this.
Let's do some.
Let's say 5,783.
That is incorrect.
Anybody else want to go? We got a 6,800 on the floor.
6,800.
6,800. Anybody else want to take a guess? Rocco says 3,400.
3,400. Let's go. Okay, it's pulled up. Attribute table. Let's go.
For those of you wondering, this is usually where Claiborne sings about now.
Claiborne, how many did you add again?
551.
Okay, let's do some math. $1,405.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, Claiborne was 551 of that. That's how big the backlog was. My Lord.
Claiborne, next time give him 1,000. We have a question from Alex.
I have a question. I'm not familiar with the project. I always do place names, study place names, because I'm on place names from Central America. So when you collect your database doesn't show or doesn't kind of lead to the possibility of looking at like cultural salience, which categories of landscape are really important, or which place names appear in various sources over and over.
So what Dr. T is asking, basically, he studies a lot of place names and language, and he's probably more languages than I'm able to hear these days. And so he's curious about, does this ability using GIS allow for you to analyze the repetitiveness? In other words, can you search the frequency of place name use and or cultural saliency of their meanings? Or is that sort of a next phase of the project?
You know, it's interesting because, you know, as we're, you know, for the most part, I've been putting a lot of these in, you know, between David and I. And when we do our monthly reports, I make sure to look back through all of them. And almost all of them are unique, which is fascinating to me, you know, because they're spanning different time periods, different, you know, interconnected and non-connected communities. And then as you spread into Louisiana and Oklahoma, the place names, the thought process behind the place names start to change. So first they're more of like, it's kind of like a description of an area or a description of what foods you can get there or what things you can get from that area. And then as we come into Oklahoma, we start to see that change, and they're more named after people and events and that sort of thing. So that's been interesting. I'm really been looking for some great dissertation work on that, but I haven't found anything out there yet. So there's some fantastic potential projects to be done on a master's or PhD level with this kind of stuff. But to answer your question, no, that is kind of part of a next phase thing. You know, when we put this together, it was just kind of like, hey, let's make a database of all these place names. And we're like, okay. And we just kind of threw it together, and it's just kind of been this nasty, you know, we really need a database manager, but, you know, maybe we'll contract Claiborne to clean it up.
I hope I did justice to your question, Dr. T.
Classroom this time, for a 1 o'clock class.
Okay, yeah, we're wrapping up.
Thank you. I just wanted to make
thanks
sure.
for letting me know. I appreciate that. All right, they're about to kick us out of the room. So that's the way anthropologists roll, Ryan. We roll in, we occupy a space, and they have to kick us out. So our time for questions, Ryan. Again, I just want to thank you for participating and being with us today. This did get recorded somewhere into the cloud, and so we'll share that with you, and so you can share it with the tribe and the staff there as well. So
cool. If you guys have any questions, send them to Mike, and he can shoot them to me, and I'll be sure to answer them.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you, buddy.
Okay.
Peace, Lachki.
Ome.